Photography is not just about capturing the moment. It's more about telling the story, evoking emotion, and guiding your audience. One of the most essential photography skills is being able to direct your audience attention to the main subject of your photo. No matter you're doing portrait photography, landscape photography, or street photography, how you control the focus, I'm not talking about the focus of your lens, I'm talking about the focus of your viewer's attention, will make or break your photo. When we look at a photo, we naturally seek the structure of the photo. That's how our brain works. We're always trying to find out what is the most important part of the image and then sort of ignore the rest. So if all the elements within your photo, they kind of looks equally important, our brain will treat it as equally unimportant. So this is why there are so many technically perfect photos, but just feels off, lack of focus, or boring. For this reason, every single photo needs a very solid visual structure. I would like to call it a visual hierarchy. Visual hierarchy will help us to direct our viewer attention to the focus, to the focal point of our photo. And then that way, our message will be strong and our work will be more impactful. So how to do that? We're going to talk about it in this video. So when talking about direct viewers' attention, some photographers say, "Oh, that's easy. You just use a shallow depth of field." Many portrait photographers are more or less doing this. So basically, what they do is use a telephoto lens, and then they shoot wide open. So that way, it just melts the background, and then their subjects stand out right away. Well, I agree this is one way to do that, but that's not the only way. So when you use a lens blur, basically what you did is you're using a technique called a negative space. Negative space basically is like you surround your main subject with a background that's a very lack of distraction, very little detail, sometimes even solid color, and that way your subject will be more stand out. But to do this, to achieve use negative space, actually there are many other ways to do the same. Like for example, you can just use like a solid color wall, or you can use sky. There are many, and then sometimes you can even choose a background that has a lot of detail, but they're in patterned, in a very like a predictable pattern. Then they can perfectly use as a solid background. And then that way you can just use that negative space to draw more attention to your main subject. So that's a negative space. The second one is using contrast. Contrast is really a big topic because there are many different ways to create a contrast. Just give you an example. You can use the lighting to create contrast. Like for example, you use a light on your main subject, and then this light can be either natural light or artificial light, and then you try and somehow make the dark background a little bit darker, so that way the lighting on your main subject and your background is very different, so your main subject is more stand out. So that's use of lighting. But I want to point it out, it's not always that the lighting should be on your subject and then keep the background dark. And sometimes it could be the opposite. It could be the lighting is actually on the background and then your main subject is actually in the dark. And that way it still create a contrast and create the same result. Just like when you use artificial light, you need to make sure the lighting actually comes from an angle that gave the most natural result, so it doesn't feel like the flash is being used. So if you're interested about how to do that, and I have a couple of videos that talk about that topic, I'll leave the link on the description. So if you're interested, check it out. So that's using lighting to create a contrast. You can use color to create contrast. There are basically two different ways. First, you just make sure your main subject's in very vivid color, and then the color in the background is kind of like desaturated, just like very neutral, so that way your main subject will be more stand out. So that's one way. The other way is to use complement color, like you use a warm and cold tone. It's the most typical way, and then to apply to your main subjects and backgrounds, and then make them to complement to each other and then stand out from each other. So the complement color sometimes can be very powerful. So then this is about the contrast. So far we talked about the contrast. They're all like a very straightforward way, and it's very visual. But sometimes it could be subtle. So what I mean by that is like sometimes you can use a blur, motion blur, to create contrast, to showcase something stands still and something else just keep moving. Like let me show you an example. So in this photo is I took this photo in Havana, Cuba. So this is the main subject is the Capitol building. So you can see that the Capitol building is in focus, like very sharp and then static. And then I use the foreground is actually this carriage just pass by. And then I slow down my shutter speed to create this motion blur. I capture the moment, just there's enough gap to showcase the Capitol building. But this motion blur and the stillness of the main subjects create a huge contrast to make the main subject stand out more. Of course, like there's a other technique using here is like the lighting. The lighting on the building is very different from the lighting on the foreground. So much brighter on the main subject, the foreground is much darker. So there's another level of contrast to make the effect even stronger. So we talk about the negative space, we talk about the contrast. So what other ways we can do? So based on the scientist study, the human eyes naturally follow like lines or curves or paths when they see that in the frame. So when they see these things, they are naturally just trace its direction. So you can use that to your advantage. You basically, when you're doing the photo shoot, you search for these things and see if any of them can be used to your advantage to make your main subject more stand out. So the typical example is using the leading lines. But keep in mind, the leading lines can be the lines that actually exist or the imagined lines. Later on, I'm going to show you some examples. And then the other thing is I call it frame within a frame. How this works, like I give you an example, like if you take a picture of 5 things that looks exactly the same, if you want to make one of them more stand out, like the most straightforward way, you just draw a circle around it, and then people right away will see, okay, so that one is a special. Of course, this is not something we can do on photography, but there are many times you can find things that do exactly the same, and because the fact they belong to the scene, so it will look much more natural. And so this frame can be in many forms. Could be round, could be rectangle, and it can be a window, can be a door, can be a hallway. So there are many different ways. So the more you think about these, the more you practice, the more creative you will be, and then your work will be more diverse. So we talk about these negative space, contrast, we talk about leading lines, we talk about frame within the frame. So I want to mention all these are just a basic tool. The real fun is when you use multiple techniques on a single image. That's when the effect is the strongest, and that's when you can get really creative. There could be hundreds of different ways of doing this. It's really fun. So let me show you some examples. So in this first example, is like the focal point is apparently this young girl walking the hallway, but we actually use 3 different techniques. The first is a frame within the frame. We can easily see the entrance to the hallway is working as a frame to make our main subjects more stand out. The second one is a contrast. The lighting in the background is much brighter, and then our main subject is in the dark, so that creates a huge contrast to make her more stand out. And then the last one is negative space. Just pay attention to the background, this bright background behind her. They're in like a predictable pattern, so they're perfect to work as negative space. So we use negative space, contrast, and frame within the frame to direct our viewer's attention. Let's take a look at another example. So this one is like the focal point is atop the building. We use 3 different techniques as well. We use a leading line. Pay attention to these windows. They actually created this invisible leading line and pointing to the top of the building. Remember, as I mentioned this before, the leading line can be either actual lines or imagined lines. So that's the leading line. And then the second one is a contrast. Pay attention to the lighting on the top of the building and the lighting at the bottom part of the building, because the top of the building is under the sun, so the color is more saturated, it's brighter. But the bottom part of the building is like desaturated and it's darker because it's under the shade. So this contrast draws attention to the top of the building. And then the last one is open space. We surround the whole building with blue sky. Barely any details or anything. But just imagine if this sky have a lot of like interesting clouds over there. What it does, it doesn't help you to build this photo. It actually just draw attention away. So pay attention. So whenever you take photo, always think about this. What is the main idea? What should I incorporate into the photo to keep make this idea even stronger, other than just create distractions? Always something we need to think about when you before you click the shutter. So let's take a look at another example. This one is leading line and contrast. The leading line is actually coming from the shadow. Remember I mentioned, just be creative, pay more attention. The lines and the frames can come from many different places. So we use the shadow as the leading line. And then the contrast, there's a car behind the these people walking on the street, and this the light from the car just creates like a perfect contrast. It looks very natural, and then in the meantime really make our main subject stand out more. Okay, now we kind of like cover the basic tools and show you some examples of using multiple tools on a single image. But I still think there's something like we haven't covered yet. That's like so far all the photos I show you guys have one focal point, but sometimes you might have two. Let me explain why. Like for example, sometimes you want to feature both the location and people, and for could be many different reasons. Like first, you probably like you show two subjects within the frame, so you can give a viewer a kind of idea the size of the subject. If you put a human being there, you can see, oh, that human being, or in the photo, you can see, oh, actually this building actually is really tall or really small, you know, things like that. The other thing is like once you add a human being in the scene, the whole photo just like come to life. You just add life to the photo other than just boring buildings. So this is something I really like to do. But when you do this, you actually incorporate another focal point within the frame. So this is something we need to pay attention to. But basically what we actually need to do, we still follow the same idea. We use the same technique, but we just need to apply on two different subjects. Sometimes it can be a little bit challenging, but if you be a little bit more creative, paying attention, you can do this like, you know, flawlessly. Let me show you some example. So this example is like, I took this shot in Malacon in Havana during the sunset. You can see the building and these two people walk on the street is the two focal points of the image. Because of the fact they're under the sun, so the lighting on them are bright. And then I just used the other building beside it because this side of the building is actually facing away from the sun, it's under the dark. So it serves two functions. The first, it created a contrast to the main building because this is dark, the other one is bright. Use contrast to draw attention. The second is this building also serves as a perfect negative space background for the two people walking in the street. So one building serves two functions and seamlessly connect the two subjects together into the scene. Okay, so next one is this is in Old Havana, and the focal point is actually the top of this building and this man walking in the street. So again, so in order to make the top building more stand out, we use a negative space and we use the contrast because the top of the building has different lighting compared with the bottom building. But how we make this gentleman in front of the camera to be more stand out, we use the bottom part of the building as negative space to make it more stand out. So to build enough contrast, so we can register. Okay, so we have two focal points here, and then they work hand in hand. Okay, so this is it, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember, great photography is always intentional. What included and excluded from scene always have a very strong reason. Next time when you go outside doing the photo shoot, think about what you can do to direct your viewer's eye, and then keep practicing. I bet you this will bring your photography to another level. Okay, thank you. I'll see you next time.